According to General Hospital teasers, runaway Britt Westbourne may steal the miraculous cure formula, so Liesl Albrecht will need to replicate the medicine doses required to rescue her daughter. Britt cannot stay at the Five Poppies resort indefinitely, despite declining Jason Morgan's invitation to take her any place she wants. The resort aspect of this plot appears to be coming to an end quickly. Britt has discovered Jocelyn, Jax and Vaughn in captivity, and the stakes are higher than ever. Britt may bring Jason back to the ranch to assist save Vaughn and Jocelyn, but what if she is apprehended? According to GH teasers, Britt may face major consequences if she realizes staying at the Five Poppies is no longer safe. Jason may persuade Britt to accompany him after all, but there will be a major problem. Britt definitely requires nightly medicine doses to keep her Huntington's disease under control. Pascal has repeatedly reminded Britt that if she does not participate in the lab, her medication will be withdrawn. Britt may be able to continue these doses without having to participate in this shady operation. Could Liesl receive her own chance to save the day? If Britt can steal the recipe for this miraculous treatment, or at least some more doses for Albrecht to experiment with, her mother may be able to duplicate the medicine. Liesl possesses the required expertise to pull off such an operation, and she is undoubtedly invested in Britt's survival. Albrecht will have many questions if she learns that Britt has genuinely survived. Although Liesl may be disappointed and irritated because she was kept in the dark, she will largely be glad that her darling Britta has returned to her. Albrecht will not want to lose Britt again, therefore she may rise to the challenge and reproduce the miracle cure to save her in the end. General Hospital spoilers reveal that Jason Morgan left the Five Poppies resort at Britt Westbourne's request. What he does not realize is that Jocelyn, Jax and Vaughn are being held captive there. In the episode from August 29th, Snoopy Britt discovers Vaughn and Joss, Pascal's captives, behind a secured door. Can Jason save everyone? Britt was able to get rid of Tomas and use her keycard to discover that Pascal is hiding the two hostages from PC. Britt's mouth dropped to the floor as she saw Jocelyn and Vaughn, who begged her to save them. Britt simply left them there. Is she truly that cold? No, we think she's really intelligent and saw that she was outnumbered in this position. We expect Britt to rush back to her room and utilize the burner phone Jason handed her. Britt has a burner phone after Jason handed her the phone. She kept it in a box in her room. Jason is currently on his way back to Port Charles, but he may still be near enough to return before it is too late. Jason will not disregard Britt's call or leave Jocelyn in danger. According to explosive GH teasers, Jason will be shocked between September 1st and September 5th. Is Britt calling with bad news? If that's the case, Britt will inform Jason about the frightening scenario at the Five Poppies. Jocelyn and Vaughn are captured. Britt is aware of shady activities on the property since she is involved. Can she figure out that Vaughn and Jocelyn work for the WSB and are the invaders Pascal mentioned? Jason will undoubtedly be astonished to hear what Britt has to say. He had no idea Joss is a junior WSB agent in training. Nonetheless, he would go to any length to ensure the safe return of Carly Spencer's daughter. Fans should expect Jason to meet Britt at the resort shortly and put their heads together. What happens next on ABC Soap? On September 5th, Vaughn and Jocelyn believe it's all over when heroic Jason appears due to Britt. Until then, people may make a hasty decision, believing they will die. Is it one they would enjoy regretting? Make sure to stay up to date on everything happening at General Hospital right now. Come back regularly for the most recent GH updates, news, and spoilers. Get comfortable and receive access to the best soap knowledge on the internet. The laboratory was a clean fortress, its walls lined with sleek monitors and glass cabinets packed with vials that glowed under the fluorescent lights. Britt Westbourne, once a trusted biochemist at General Hospital's cutting-edge research section, had spent years under Dr. Liesl Albrecht's strict supervision. Her deft fingers, which were typically steady as she pipetted accurate measurements of substances, trembled as she grasped a flash drive with the recipe for a revolutionary drug, a miracle cure for a rare autoimmune condition that had perplexed doctors for years. This was no ordinary theft. it was a betrayal motivated by desperation, ambition, and a glimmer of moral turmoil that Britt couldn't completely erase. She put the drive into her coat pocket, her pulse racing as she looked up at the surveillance cameras overhead. The lab was silent, except for the buzz of machinery and the distant clatter of a janitor's cart. Britt's departure was painstakingly planned, but the consequences of her actions squeezed against her chest like a vice. She needed to act quickly. Albrecht would discover the missing data within hours, and the tough doctor was not one to forgive. Britt's choice to steal the formula was not impulsive. It stemmed from years of resentment at seeing Albrecht take credit for achievements while Britt worked in the background. Britt devised the miracle remedy, dubbed ether, which was a delicate mix of synthetic proteins and gene-editing enzymes capable of stopping the sickness in its tracks. She'd spent endless nights perfecting the formula, her eyes burning from staring at molecular models on her screen. However, when the first successful trial results were announced, Albrecht's name appeared on the news release, as did his face on the platform. Britt's colleagues murmured about her mentor's harshness, but none dared to approach her. Albrecht's reputation was a two-edged sword, brilliant scientist and ruthless tyrant. Britt had suffered the marginalization, flippant criticism, and stolen accolades, until she couldn't. The flash drive represented her defiance and claim to what was rightfully hers. But as she snuck out of the lab's back exit, the cold night air hit her like a warning. She wasn't simply taking data, she was destroying her life. Albrecht, on the other hand, has experience with catastrophes. The German-born biochemist had worked her way to the top of General Hospital's research section through pure intelligence and unwavering determination. Her office, in stark contrast to the chaotic lab, was a monument to order, with files neatly organized, a single orchid on the windowsill, and a wall of degrees that exuded authority. When the system alert went off at 3 a.m., indicating a breach in the lab's database, Albrecht's initial reaction was not panic, but cold calculation. She recognized Britt instantly. The young scientist had been too quiet recently, her questions too piercing, and her schedule too unpredictable. Albrecht had noticed a flash of defiance in Britt's eyes at their previous encounter, when she casually proposed presenting ether at an upcoming global conference. Britt's jaw tightened, and her quiet was louder than her argument. Albrecht smiled grimly as she gazed at the empty data folder on her desktop. Britt had underestimated her. The hospital's security squad was ready by morning, but Britt had already left. ID and a burner phone. The flash drive, now tucked away in a concealed pocket of her rucksack, seemed like a ticking bomb. Britt was not naive, she saw the formula's importance. Pharmaceutical companies would pay millions for it, with black market brokers offering even more. But she hadn't planned to sell it yet. She wanted to finish what she started, to show that ether functioned without Albrecht's shadow looming over her. She'd rented a tiny flat under an alias and created a makeshift lab in the basement, assembling equipment from second-hand vendors. Every step was risky, but Britt was motivated by a vision: patients who had been given months to live walking out of hospitals, complete again. She saw their faces in her dreams, a wordless cry that kept her awake all night, mixing concoctions under the light of a solitary lamp. Back at General Hospital, Albrecht was under a different type of pressure. The hospital board was upset, investors were concerned, and the media had learned of a security incident. Ether was the hospital's golden ticket, a project worth billions of dollars. Without the formula, the trials would stall and the hospital's reputation would suffer, possibly irreversibly. Albrecht's team scrambled to recreate the formula from fragmented backups and lab notes, but Britt had been careful in wiping key data from the servers. Albrecht's thoughts raced as she reviewed the remaining files. She was confident in her ability to reproduce ether. Her knowledge was unparalleled, her memory razor-sharp. But time was an enemy. The board ordered her 3 months to come up with a viable formula or risk jeopardizing her career and the hospital's future. Britt's new existence was an investigation into paranoia. She avoided public settings, colored her hair a mousy brown, and wore unnecessary glasses. Her basement lab was far from the cutting-edge facility she'd left behind, but she made do. The formula was complicated, requiring precise conditions to synthesize, and her equipment was barely enough. She worked relentlessly, motivated by a combination of guilt and determination. The faces of those hypothetical patients tormented her, as did Albrecht's voice, which echoed in her mind, "You're nothing without me." Britt shook the thought aside, concentrating on the precise titration in front of her. She was so close to recreating the breakthrough she'd made in the lab. But each failed batch eroded her confidence, and the weight of her theft increased. She had torched all bridges, and there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Albrecht was unrelenting. She worked around the clock, and her crew avoided her violent mood swings. She compared previous lab logs, questioned coworkers about Britt's procedures, and ran simulations to reverse engineer the formula. Her approach was thorough, almost surgical, but the gaps in the data were frustrating. Ether was more than just a chemical composition, it was a symphony of interactions, with each component depending on the others. Britt had grabbed the score, leaving Albrecht to hum the song from memory. Nevertheless, she refused to accept defeat. She hired a private detective to track out Britt, knowing that finding her could be the key to reclaiming the formula, or at least preventing her from profiting from it. Albrecht was not motivated solely by vengeance, she regarded Ether as her legacy, a tribute to her creativity. Losing it was not an option. As the weeks grew into months, Britt's growth stagnated. Her makeshift lab couldn't match the regulated environment of General Hospital, and her funds were running low. She'd contacted someone in the underground science community, which was a hazardous action that may expose her. The contact promised access to superior equipment, but the cost was high, a percentage of the formula's future income. Britt paused, her moral compass wobbling. She didn't steal Ether to get rich, she wanted to save lives and establish her worth. However, survival required compromise, and she was running out of options. Late at night, as she stared at her laptop's flickering screen, she wondered if she'd made a huge mistake. The dream of patients going free seemed remote, overshadowed by the reality of her loneliness. Albrecht's investigator was closing in. A shaky photo from a gas station security camera showed Britt in a small Midwestern town, and Albrecht suspected the girl was still working on Ether. She doubled her efforts in the lab, motivated by a combination of rage and admiration. Britt was brilliant, she had to concede, but genius without discipline is chaos. Albrecht's team struck a breakthrough when they discovered a partial sequence on an unnoticed backup drive. It wasn't enough to fully reproduce Ether, but it was a start. Albrecht's confidence soared, she could fill in the spaces. She worked feverishly, her hands steady as she mixed compounds, her mind piecing together the puzzle Britt had left strewn. The climax occurred unexpectedly. Britt's contact deceived her by revealing her whereabouts to a pharmaceutical firm looking to buy Ether. When armed men arrived at her apartment, Britt narrowly escaped with the flash drive still in her hands. She escaped to a new city, her heart beating as she realized the stakes were more than she had anticipated. Meanwhile, Albrecht's team created a working prototype of Ether, enough to satisfy the board and restart the trials. But it wasn't perfect, side effects lingered, and Albrecht knew the original formula was still out there, in Britt's possession. The investigator's most recent report placed Britt in a beach city, and Albrecht made a decision. She planned to confront her former protégé herself. Their meeting was unavoidable, a collision of pride and betrayal. Britt sat across from Albrecht in a dimly lit cafe, holding a flash drive like a loaded revolver. Britt's eyes were tired, and her attitude had melted due to tiredness. Albrecht's gaze remained steely, but there was a flare of something else, regret, perhaps, or acknowledgement of the flame she'd helped start in Britt. They spoke in quiet tones, each word carrying the weight of their shared history. Britt said she couldn't finish Ether alone, while Albrecht recognized the prototype was defective. For a time, the prospect of reconciliation hung in the air. But once destroyed, trust is difficult to recover. Britt slid the flash drive across the table, her palms shaking. Albrecht accepted it, her expression unreadable. The aftermath was calm yet deep. Albrecht returned to General Hospital with the formula restored and the trials back on track. As Britt had hoped, ether proved to be a miracle, saving lives. However, her name was absent from the headlines, and her role was obliterated. She faded into obscurity, beginning afresh in a different field, plagued by the realization that her disobedience had altered nothing, but everything. Albrecht, too, had scars. Her victory was hollow, however. She'd restored her legacy, but at the expense of the only person who might have comprehended it. Late at night at the lab, she found herself staring at Britt's previous workstation, which was now taken by someone new. The orchid on her windowsill wilted, and she did not replace it. The story of ether was one of victory and defeat, ambition and sacrifice. Britt's theft had triggered a series of events that neither she nor Albrecht could have imagined. The miracle remedy continued on, but its creators were permanently transformed, tied by a formula that both defined and tore them apart. The hospital pushed forward, and the world cheered, but in the quiet moments, both ladies realized the truth: brilliance has a cost, and certain debts are never entirely paid. Jason's plot to rescue Britt, Joss, and Vaughn had been meticulously planned, but nothing went as planned on this night. He'd been tracking their location for hours, following the weak trace Vaughn had left behind before his phone died. Every fact Jason pieced together caused his chest to constrict. He knew Britt well enough to know she'd attempt to be strong, but if she was cornered without assistance, things might go downhill quickly. Joss, on the other hand, was impulsive and bold to a fault, and Vaughn was unprepared to deal with this type of danger. Time was not simply slipping away, it was being wrenched from his grasp. When Jason eventually got at the ancient dockside warehouse, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool September air blowing in from the water. The faint buzz of equipment echoed within, and he crouched behind a stack of crates, waiting for any movement. He could hear voices, muffled, harsh, and urgent. Someone was giving orders. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone said it all: whoever had kidnapped Britt, Joss, and Vaughn had no intention of letting them escape alive. He adjusted his rifle grip, breathing steadily as he moved around the building's edge. He knew from the plan Spinelli had supplied that there were two entrances, a heavily guarded one on the east side and a smaller maintenance entry on the west. Jason halted when he approached the west door, which was meant to be unmonitored. A red laser grid flashed faintly against the doorframe. A motion sensor. They had improved security since Spinelli's last intel. Jason cursed beneath his breath. This changed everything. He couldn't risk setting off the alarm. If he did, whomever was inside would realize they were compromised, and Britt, Joss, and Vaughn would be the first to suffer the consequences. He retreated into the darkness, recalculating every feasible angle. There had to be another way in, one that would not alert the soldiers within. That's when he heard it, the muffled sound of screams. It was weak but unmistakable. Joss. His stomach tightened immediately. He got closer to the sound and followed it around to the far side of the warehouse. There was a single dirty window cracked open just enough to give him a skewed view of the inside. Britt was tied to a chair with her wrists bound and a cut on her temple. Joss was kneeling beside her, her face pallid but resolute. Vaughn sat slumped against a pillar, hands zip-tied but conscious, staring at the men pacing in front of him. Jason counted 5 hostiles, possibly 6. They're all armed. One of them, a big man with a shaved head and a jagged scar down his jaw, appeared to be in control. He barks an order, and another man pushes Joss back when she tries to stand. Jason's heart quickened. He could no longer wait for backup. But as he prepared to break through the window, something else drew his attention: movement behind the crates near Britt. A man Jason had never seen before stooped low, meticulously building something metallic. Then it struck him, an improvised explosive device. Jason's heart pumped harder. If they were rigging the facility to blow up, he had less time than he realized. If he moved in too forcefully, they might start it out of desperation. But if he waited, Britt, Joss, and Vaughn might be trapped in the explosion. He tapped his earpiece to signal Spinelli. "They've got explosives," Jason murmured quietly. There was a delay on the other end before Spinelli's terrified voice came through. "That's much worse than expected. You must disarm the device before going in, stone cold, or you will all send me the plans for the warehouse basement," Jason interrupted him. "Now." As Spinelli scrambled, Jason shifted back toward the loading dock, looking for a way into the lower level, where the explosives wiring would most likely run. The basement entry panel was buried beneath a set of steel stairs, and the lock appeared antique. He swiftly grabbed it, slipped inside and plunging into the darkness. The basement smelled like oil, rust, and stagnant water. Jason walked silently, his torch beam cutting through the shadows as he traced the wires running across the ceiling. When he discovered the main control box, he realized how complicated the system was. Whoever planted the device understood exactly what they were doing. It was intended to knock down the entire edifice, not merely eliminate evidence. Before he could begin working, the sound of footsteps echoed above him. People raised their voices. The door slammed hard. Jason looked up at the ceiling. Something went wrong upstairs. He didn't have any more time to be delicate. He turned off the power to the main trigger line and hoped it wouldn't detonate prematurely. The lights within the warehouse flickered and died, leaving the entire area in darkness. That was his opening. Jason moved quickly, approaching two guards patrolling along the south corridor. Before either of them could respond, he disarmed the first with a hard hit to the arm and choked the second. Jason slid into the main chamber and positioned himself behind a stack of barrels, examining the space with the flickering emergency lights. "Where is he?" Scarface snarled, whirling around and dragging Joss to her feet. He pushed a knife to her throat, using her as leverage. "Come out now, or she'll die." Jason tightened his jaw while calculating angles, distances, and hazards. He could not reveal his stance too quickly. Instead, he whispered into his communication device, "Spinelli, kill the cameras." "I already did." "You're flying blind in there," Spinelli said uneasily. "Good." Jason adjusted his aim and fired. The shot clipped Scarface's hand, sending the knife skittering across the floor. The commotion erupted instantaneously. Jason ducked into cover and returned fire expertly, each round striking its mark. In the pandemonium, Vaughn kicked a container at Joss, allowing her just enough leverage to break free from her captor's grasp. She ran for Britt, attempting to free her ties, as Jason advanced cautiously, keeping the hostiles pinned down. One sprang at him from the side, but Jason sidestepped, driving the man against a steel beam before knocking him out with the buttstock of his gun. "Jason!" Britt shouted out, her voice unsteady but steady enough to hold his attention. "Stay low," he said, searching the room for any potential hazards. That's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The man building the dynamite had vanished. Jason's instincts went into overdrive. If the bomber wasn't in the room, he was someplace attempting to complete the detonation manually. He dashed to the far hallway, where the cables converged, and discovered the bomber crouching behind a control panel, desperately connecting a backup trigger. Jason dove forward, tackling him hard. The detonator clattered on the floor and slipped just out of reach. The man hissed and drew a concealed blade, but Jason intercepted the swing, twisting the attacker's wrist until the weapon dropped. Pinned and outmatched, the bomber spat blood and shouted, "It's too late. You can't save them all." Jason knocked him out with a powerful swing, but his words rang out like a warning. He grabbed the detonator and smashed it against the wall, preventing it from being used. Then he returned to the main chamber, where Joss had released Britt and Vaughn. They huddled together, startled but alive. Jason felt relieved, but only for a little period. He could still hear shouts outside. Reinforcements were on their way. "Everyone move," Jason yelled, directing them to the west exit. They dashed into the dimly lit corridor, Vaughn supporting Britt as Joss grabbed to Jason. However, just as they approached the maintenance door, it burst open. A next wave of armed men charged in, forcing Jason to push everyone behind him. There was no time to think, just respond. He fired quickly, taking out the first two, but there were too many. "Go!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Get out, now!" Joss paused, refusing to leave him, but Vaughn drew her toward the exit as Britt stumbled beside them. Jason laid down cover fire, pinning the assailants just long enough to allow the others to flee into the darkness. When he eventually slid out behind them, he could hear sirens in the distance. Spinelli had summoned the cops for backup, but the danger was far from ended. The men hunting them would not stop. Jason led the party through the maze of cargo containers near the pier, remaining low and silent. But halfway across, a floodlight swept over them, followed by a barrage of gunshots. They dove for cover, and Jason returned fire, pushing the attackers back far enough to reach Spinelli's waiting SUV. Everyone got in, and Spinelli pressed the throttle, the tires screeching as they sped away from the tumult. For a minute, there was just silence inside the car, broken breathing, pounding hearts, and the distant sound of police sirens. Joss sat in the back, holding Britt's hand tightly and reluctant to let go. Vaughn looked out the window, still comprehending how close they all had been to death. Jason eventually lowered his weapon, his expression unreadable. "We're not safe yet," he stated bluntly, staring at the headlights behind them. "They'll come after us," Britt said him, her voice shaking but firm. "So what do we do?" Jason's jaw tensed as he gazed out at the dark streets of Port Charles. "We finish this," he stated emphatically. But Jason knew it wasn't over. Whoever arranged this kidnapping was seeking more than just Britt, Joss, and Vaughn. They were after him. And tonight's rescue was simply the start of a far bigger war, one that would consume everyone he cared about. When they sped away from the docks, Jason thought the turmoil was finished, but the frightening silence inside Spinelli's SUV revealed that the nightmare had only just begun. Joss leaned forward, her fingers trembling as she clutched Jason's seat back. Her voice was raspy, nearly breaking. "Jason, they were expecting us. Someone tipped them off. They were ready for us." Jason did not respond immediately away. His jaw tightened, and his hands gripped around his firearm, despite the fact that they were not in immediate danger. He had thought the same thing, but seeing Joss say it aloud confirmed his worst fears. Someone close to them had betrayed them. Spinelli looked at Jason in the rearview mirror, his voice low and unsteady. "Stone cold, I'm detecting 3 vehicles trailing us, no plates, no state registration, and tinted windows. Whoever these men are, they're not done." Jason's gaze tightened. "Lose them." Spinelli veered sharply down a side street, passing through a tiny industrial corridor. The tires squealed, and everyone in the SUV gripped to their seats. Britt whimpered, pushing a palm against the cut on her forehead while Vaughn supported her. Joss leaned out and softly brushed Britt's arm, but her face was expressionless, her eyes remote. Jason turned in his seat, studying the darkness behind them. 2 of the automobiles backed off, but the third remained on their tail. He lowered the window, placing his rifle on the edge, as Spinelli cut left into Port Charles's desolate streets. "They're pushing us toward the river," Spinelli remarked with clenched teeth. "I can't keep this up forever." "Don't," Jason answered quietly. "Let them think they have us cornered." Spinelli gave him a glance. "Stone cold, please tell me you're not," but Jason was already leaning out the window, waiting for the appropriate moment. As the SUV negotiated a tight corner, the pursuing car became close enough for Jason to glimpse the driver's silhouette. He took a calm breath, aimed, and fired once. The bullet broke the front tire, causing the automobile to skid into a lamppost. Sparks flew into the night, and the shriek of twisted metal reverberated throughout the street. "Nice shot," Vaughn said under his breath, but Jason did not answer. He was not celebrating. He knew this wasn't the end of them. Finally, Spinelli slowed the SUV and pulled into an abandoned cargo yard, where he parked under the protection of rusted containers. Everyone sat in silence for a few moments, attempting to control their breathing. Britt finally broke the silence, her voice unsteady yet piercing. "Jason, you saved us, but we can't continue fleeing like this. Whoever is behind this will not stop. They wanted us to live long enough so they could use us." "Why?" Jason noticed her look but did not respond quickly. He noticed Vaughn, who had been unusually quiet, leaning against the side window. Vaughn's expression was uncomfortable and unreadable. Jason put the thought away for later. "We're going to figure out who set this up," Jason eventually said. "But first, I need to get you somewhere safe." Joss shook her head. "Safe? There is no longer a safe place, Jason. They knew where to locate us. They knew the docks. They were aware of Vaughn. Someone close to us told them everything." Britt nodded sadly. "She's correct. And if they know that much, they know where we will flee. We can't go to GH. We cannot go to Sunny's. We can't even go back to your apartment." Jason looked at Spinelli, who was already typing furiously on his laptop, pulling up encrypted streams. "I'll find a place," Spinelli replied without looking up. "A safe house outside of the city. No paper trace, no digital footprint. But stone cold, we've got bigger problems." Jason turned abruptly to him. "What now?" Spinelli's fingers remained frozen on the keyboard as he gulped hard. "The explosives. I cross-referenced schematics and wiring patterns, and it wasn't at random. The device was military-grade, exactly the type utilized by a covert outfit I'd been following for weeks." Jason's gaze darkened. "Who?" Spinelli hesitated, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Cassandra Pierce's former network. I assumed they went black after she died, but someone has revived them." Britt realized they were targeting everyone related to her. "So, this was not about me. Or Vaughn. Or even Joss. It was about you." Jason did not answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Joss eventually snapped, her voice trembling with wrath. "Then we are bait. They're utilizing us to reach you. And you're just sitting here, pretending as if this is normal." Jason turned to her, his voice gentle but forceful. "Joss, I did not pick this. But now that we know, I'm going to finish this. All of everything." Vaughn squirmed uncomfortably in his seat and spoke up for the first time. "You don't realize how deep this is, Jason. These are not street thugs. They're organized, they've secured cash, and they've been planning for months." Jason observed him closely, his instincts on high alert. Vaughn was correct, but there was something odd about his delivery, too much conviction, too much insider knowledge. Jason stored it aside, refusing to confront him just yet. Spinelli shut his laptop, his expression pallid. "Stone cold, the safe house is ready. But we have to disappear. No phones, no GPS, and no credit cards. If they are tracking our movements, one incorrect step and they will locate us." Jason nodded once. "Then we go dark." The gang sat in nervous quiet as Spinelli restarted the SUV and drove toward the outskirts of Port Charles. Every street they traveled felt heavier, and every shadow represented a potential menace. Jason kept his handgun ready, his eyes continually scanning, knowing they were being pursued. Britt laid her head against the window, exhausted but determined to stay awake. Joss grabbed her phone securely, despite Jason's warning to turn it off. Vaughn stared straight ahead, deep in thought, his jaw clenched. Jason leaned forward and rested his arms on his knees. "This isn't over," he muttered quietly, primarily to himself. Whoever planned this made one mistake: they came after the wrong people. Spinelli stared at him from the driver's seat, his voice tinged with anxiety. "And what are your plans once we arrive at the safe house?" Jason's gaze was icy, firm, and unwavering. "We find out who is behind this. Then we take the fight to them." Outside, the city lights faded into darkness as the SUV drove down the country roads. However, Jason couldn't ignore the impression that they weren't alone. The tension in the air was too great, too intentional. Someone was watching out there. Waiting. And Jason knew it was only the beginning.